Now, let's say a few words about our speaker. Minko Gechev is the product lead for Angular at Google. Previously, he was a co-founder and the CTO of Rhyme.com, which in 2019 joined Coursera. He's an extremely experienced professional with a passion for open source and a track record of successful contributions to various projects. Minko has received 2 awards from the President of Republic of Bulgaria in recognition of his work, and he's been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. Welcome, Minko. We are extremely happy to have you with us today.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the great intro. Let me share my screen. All right, I assume you see my screen, right?
We do.
All right, let me get started. So, as you already know, I work at Google where I lead the Angular product, and overall I work on web frameworks. I'm also working on converging Angular with another framework that we have at Google. And my career actually started by contributing to open source projects. So I'd like to share more with you about it today. I spent a lot of time reflecting on how open source can provide equal opportunity, and pretty much that's the topic of my presentation. So for many years, people have been trying to figure out how to find a satisfying career that is also going to bring them some money and they'll be able to make a difference with it. In fact, in Japanese, there is a term for this called ikigai. It translates as a reason of being. And there are many blog posts and articles out there that use this motto in order to teach you how to find a good career. In the real world, though, things are a little bit more complicated compared to the simple motto. We all want to be in the center of this Venn diagram here that you see. We all want to find our ikigai, but the truth is that we're all born in very different contexts with very different levels of opportunity. How to get good at something, for example. It's not trivial to become a professional engineer, doctor, or a musician. What can you get paid for? Well, there are many things that you could be paid for, and how do you even know what all the possibilities are when you're getting started in your career? What do you love? Well, what are even the options? For example, I know I love doing karate right now, but I wouldn't have known that I love doing karate when I grew up, even if there was no karate dojo. Very similar with software engineering. If I was not lucky enough to have a very passionate high school teacher that was teaching me computer science and engineering, I wouldn't have known that software engineering is even an option. I remember starting in high school and not even believing that a human without a PhD can write a computer program. And here I am, I still don't have a PhD, and I have written quite a few computer programs. So what does the world even need? Well, if we knew what the world needs, we'll have solved all of its problems already. Let us look at this very hypothetical profile. We may see people like this made-up personality, John Doe, as someone who seems that they have found their ikigai. He found an impactful company and is making a lot of money doing something that he loves. This is a very kind of well-defined, very well-paved path to, let's say, professional success and fulfillment. First, this hypothetical personality was very lucky to be born in Silicon Valley with supportive parents. Both of them were engineers. They got him excited about software engineering from a very young age. And he was fortunate enough to be accepted at Stanford University, which is his parents' alma mater, which gives him an even higher chance to join there. At Stanford, he learned in a very competitive environment and was mentored by some of the top computer scientists out there. Stanford prepared him to pass interviews at big tech companies, where he was also lucky enough to work on impactful projects and receives very satisfying paychecks. With an impressive resume as this one, it's very easy to get venture capital and to become a startup founder and, well, change the world with your product. The stars just aligned. John Doe here discovered his ikigai And he found something that he was passionate about, that the world needs, and became good at it. And well, he also got paid for it. But notice how many times I said the word lucky and fortunate. Like a lot of times. Like lucky being born in the right place, lucky going to the right university, lucky joining the right companies, getting venture capital, and so on. I was doing some very basic back on the envelope math to see what are the chances for this to happen. And it's about 1 out of 10 million people would get the chance to find their ikigai that way. And actually, the chance could be even lower. So what about the rest of us? If we were only being fortunate, if we rely on only being fortunate to make a difference and have a satisfying career, we better be very lucky. Like, for example, I didn't go down this well-paved path, but I discovered an alternative way to find my ikigai. And now I see it as an equalizer, and this is open source. So the internet itself is a very equalizing force. It has endless information, a lot of resources, and a lot of communities. For people interested in technology, like us, open source provides an incredible opportunity to discover what you love, grow your skills, and make an impact while also building a career. Open source is denoting software for which the original source code is made freely available and might be redistributed and modified. Pretty much you can take any open source program out there with an MIT license. You can modify it. You can even sell it if you want. The source code, it is the list of commands that gets assembled together into an executable program, as you already know. Notice that the original code is made freely available, and that's the keyword here, that it is freely available. Usually when you have software, like when you develop some program that you're selling to consumers, you kind of compile the source codes to some like lower level language. Let's say if you're building a like Java application, you would compile it to Java bytecode, and you distribute this Java bytecode without necessarily providing the original Java source code. But with open source, you share the original source code also that you have written, which is easy to understand, and you can easily read. You can easily learn from it and modify it if you want to. And there is a global network of open source enthusiasts on GitHub. People who are sharing code for free and constantly exchanging very different ideas in a very cooperative and very competitive and usually very constructive way. Not always, but most of the time. You can think of GitHub as, actually, I think of GitHub as Instagram, where instead of giving likes on my photos, I give likes to different projects and different implementations that I really like. Just like in Instagram, on GitHub, you can explore different topics that are aligned with your interests. For example, if you're interested in data visualization, you can just explore charting libraries. If you're interested in bioengineering or medicine, just feel free to explore all the research projects on these topics. All of these projects, they're pretty much like very dense and concentrated bodies of knowledge. So you can learn a lot from them. Not always trivial, but getting started, you don't have to really go all the way in. You can just scratch the surface at first. If you want to explore any topics further, you can always look up Wikipedia or another free resource with open collaboration model. Most large tech companies, they're also on GitHub, developing open source. Just if we have a peek at one organization here, Google, you can see that it hosts over 2,000 projects. And as an open source contributor, if you start contributing to these 2,000 projects, you will not get immediately paid for it. But for example, I got hired at Google due to my open source contributions to one of Google's open source projects, Angular. Open source also provides opportunities to make an impact. So popular projects on GitHub, they're often connected to people who find valuable. Like a great example here is the Linux kernel, which is used by billions of developers worldwide. And if you're wondering how impactful open source is, a study by the European Union showed that the total economic impact is estimated to be up to 95 billion per year, only in the European Union. That's a lot, 95 billion euro a year. So you can receive even some kind of an education on GitHub that can be parallel to top universities. There are literally collections of courses, materials from all these top universities out there. Additionally, each project on GitHub is a very dense body of knowledge. Some of the top researchers host their work on the platform. And what about finding world-class mentorship? So in order to look at that, let us explore an alternative career path of this another hypothetical personality called Jane Doe. She's an open source developer, and she worked on projects that she was really passionate about and made a difference with them. For example, she became interested in the Linux operating system, and by improving it, she made a difference around the world. Her work was reviewed by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, who is still actively involved in the project. On GitHub, Jane also worked side by side with Tim Berners-Lee. He's the inventor of the World Wide Web, on his project for developing a truly decentralized data ownership model for the internet. So Jane grew her skill set, worked with some of the brightest software engineers out there, and made a difference in the world just from her bedroom by pushing code to open source projects. While with open source, you have access to today's most prominent engineers. Pretty much every one of them is on GitHub. You just need computer and internet connection, and your work can be reviewed by the creator of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee. Just could be a mentor for a day. That's pretty impressive. Now, this is a very hypothetical situation, I know, with Jane Doe and also with John Doe, made up person, made up people, made up names. I'd like to share with you also something that is way more modest as a story, like nothing like John Doe or Jane Doe here, but it's still somewhat of a validation that what I said is not a fantasy. It could actually happen. So currently I live somewhere here, but originally I'm from a place very far away, actually about 10,000 kilometers away. I was born in Troyan. It's a pretty cute town in Bulgaria with about 20,000 people. And as I mentioned earlier, I was pretty lucky to have a very passionate teacher who taught me the basics, the fundamentals of software engineering. He taught me some PHP, some JavaScript, MySQL, so I was able to build web apps when I was in high school. After that, I went to study computer science at Sofia University, and I remember spending countless of hours right here in this local cafe, just looking at projects on GitHub. I contributed to one of Google's projects back then, Angular, and I was doing that daily. Like whenever I had an opportunity for it, I was contributing with blog posts, writing like articles, doing some code improvements, giving talks. Some Angular team members were engineers at Google. They were mentoring me by reviewing my code. And actually, it was kind of unreal the first time when it happened, when I opened my first pull request. I'm going to show it to you in a little bit. So this way I received mentorship from some world-class specialists while I was just working in my local cafe. I was there so frequently that I knew the staff and we would have a chat before I start working. So having invested many hours in the Angular ecosystem, I found a gap and discovered an opportunity to develop a tool that I called Equalizer. It is a tool for statically analyzing Angular projects and figuring out whether they're following best practices or not. The Angular team saw my project on GitHub, and they ended up introducing it as part of their official offering for Angular, which was huge for me. I couldn't believe it's happening. I took screenshots of this just to make sure it doesn't disappear from the internet, and I have validation that the Angular team was excited about my work. So as of today, Equalizer has over 101 million downloads. And thanks to my contributions to open source projects, I also got to meet the president of Bulgaria, who recognized me for my work. All right, so when talking about contributing to open source, I often hear a couple of very common myths. The first one is that it is too hard. Actually, that's not really a myth. It really is too hard. It could be really hard if you want to implement a very sophisticated change in the Linux kernel without having software engineering background. Like, it could be really hard. The good news is, though, that it doesn't have to be that hard. You don't have to go all the way into the deep waters. You can just stay on a high level and start small. You can start with a very small contribution by, let's say, fixing a typo in the documentation, for example. That's my very first contribution to a GitHub project. Here I spent 2-3 hours making sure that the change I did was actually meaningful. I was really anxious and nervous. I remember being in my apartment in Sofia at the time and just spending hour after hour just making sure that everything is okay before I submit my change. And here is the actual change. I just added one brace to the documentation. And this single line helped me to gain a lot of more confidence and allowed me to follow with hundreds of other contributions. So today I am in the Angular's leadership team, and it got me there. Maybe it was not the only contribution that I made, but it was the first step that I took. The next myth that I hear very frequently is that I'm not good enough and the people are going to laugh at my work. Well, if someone laughs at your work, they really don't deserve your attention. Everyone starts somewhere, and if a project maintainer doesn't act respectfully for whatever reason, you just find another project to contribute to. There are many other projects that you can help, actually, if someone doesn't appreciate your help for their particular project. There is a really excellent talk from Google I/O back in 2009. I remember being in my student dorms and watching it, and just helped me realize a lot of things about engineering. It's the myth of the genius programmer. It just completely changed my perspective. It is a wonderful presentation where two engineers from Google, they talk about the imposter syndrome and how it impacts very collaborative environments. It's applicable way beyond the engineering, so I would recommend you to have a look at it. So the final myth that I'm going to cover today is that by contributing to open source projects, you'll be doing work for free. Well, if you start doing very mundane tasks without learning anything new, you'll be probably wasting your time. So there is a risk here that you'll be doing work for free. But also, you don't have to work. You can just play. You can just find problems that excite you, and you can get mentorship from the project maintainers by helping them build better products. For instance, with Angular, I was studying design patterns at university, and I tried to figure out a way to just try to find the different design patterns in Angular and see how they're implemented by these Google engineers. From there, I got excited about compilers. So I started looking at the implementation of the Angular compiler and learned a lot there until I started contributing to the actual Angular compiler. All my knowledge was only theoretical. So this helped me to level up in my engineering career. So yeah, open source is this collaborative environment across the world, and people are definitely motivated by different aspects of open source. Some people are just competitive and they want their work to be visible. Nothing bad in that. Like, other people are motivated by their work getting traction or solving problems. It just doesn't really matter what your motivation is and what moves you forward, as long as you're enjoying it, you're improving your skills, and you're making a difference for others. That's enough. So on Twitter, I reached out to my followers and asked them, how does open source impact their lives? And I got a lot of very interesting responses. My network consists mostly of engineers, as you can imagine. So that's the context in which the responses are. Like Matt from Canada, he said that contributing to open source allowed him to become self-employed, which is great, provided him some level of freedom. Here, Alexander, he shared that open source gave him a thriving community in a profession. Debbie said that open source helped her to stand out from the crowd and also helped her to get accepted as speaker at conferences, which is honestly pretty fun. I used to travel a lot for conferences. Now I still go for events occasionally, and it's great to be able to travel around the world and not pay for it. The conference organizers are covering your accommodation. And also you meet a lot of passionate people around you, and you get even more excited to make an even higher impact. You make friends. It's fun. Santosh from India says that contributing to open source changed his life and also let him find a better job. And Xavi benefited from open source by learning and becoming a better programmer. There are many other stories out there. I know a lot of people in the open source community, and many people have benefited a lot from it, as long as we're doing it intentionally and we're also taking care of ourselves. We're not compulsively contributing to open source, but we're making it with intention to grow better and to as better professionals and make impact. All right, so I hope I was able to show you what impact open source can have on your personal life and your professional life and the lives of others. It can provide you with an equal opportunity wherever you are, as long as you have internet access and a computer. That's pretty much all you need. It enables you to make an impact and collaborate some of the best software engineers pretty much in the industry. That's all I had for you today. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Thank you, Minko. Thank you for having you. And I want to say that we received really valuable information, great inspiring story as well. We do have a couple of questions on the chat. The first question is, with open source projects often being accessible 24/7, how can developers maintain a healthy work-life balance and avoid feeling pressure to be constantly available?
Yeah. So very much, I guess, depends on the popularity of the project. Something like Angular right now, we have 26,000 pull requests. We had 26,000 pull requests available to Angular. And for such a popular project, you would need a larger team. So it depends on the popularity, depends on the scope too. If you have something like Angular again, where we have like hundreds of different APIs, you have large API surface. It's a complicated project with a lot of functionalities. So the chances are that popularity and complexity is going to require more work. I guess that's why for Angular, we have 25 people or so working on Angular itself. In my open source project that I was building in my spare time, I'll try to keep the scope small, which makes it easier to maintain. And also, Equalizer, this project that I shared, it had 101 million downloads. I have a couple of more that are popular, but most of my projects out of 300 are, maybe some of them have users, but the majority of them don't. So you can just build wherever you find fun for yourself. If you don't have users, there is no pressure. If you have users, there is impact and there is some pressure. I see maintainers sometimes getting a little bit too much pressure and feeling that they're going to burn out. I think it's good to take a break in these cases.
Thank you. We do have a lot of questions our way. So next question is, what tech stack should I have to get hired by Google as a front-end engineer?
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple of things. First, a recruiter needs to notice your resume, or you need to get a referral from someone who knows you and who has worked with you and can recommend you to recruiters at Google. And what Google values during the recruitment process and the interview process is being familiar with data structures and algorithms. So as long as you can understand basic data structures and implement tree traversals, different like searching algorithms, you'd be mostly good. I recommend checking lead code and solving as many problems as you can there. Specific technologies are not as critical during the Google interview process. You need to know one programming language at least and be really good at it, but don't feel obligated to learn, like to be great in React or Angular or any of these.
Thank you. And next question is from Paloni: how to deal with imposter syndrome when working in open source projects?
Yeah, it's not easy. Yeah, I spent so many hours on this pull request where I added one brace and like a new line. I'll say there are a couple of things. I guess you can make a connection, like something that I see that works for some people. Like in Bulgaria, I didn't have access to many open source engineers. Some of them that I had access to, they were not very nice with me, so it didn't work out too well. Others, though, in other environments, like you can find maintainers of open source projects who are actually nice people. You can go to meetups, you can connect with people who are with the speakers. If they're open source maintainers, you can just tell them that you're interested in contributing. They would likely tell you that there are opportunities for contribution in the documentation. Or if you're not in a community where there are meetups where you can meet people who could support you, you can just start getting familiarize yourself with a particular project. Just spend as much time as you have with their Discord community, reading their GitHub issues, reading their documentation. And at a certain point, you're going to be really familiar with the ecosystem, like after a couple of months. So you would find opportunities for contribution. You might find just a typo in the documentation. And if you fix a typo in the documentation, that's great. We really love when someone fixes just one character in our Angular documentation. It's very easy contribution for us to merge. And it is also really helpful. Like I don't want to, my grammar is not great, for instance, and my spelling is not great. So if someone can fix it once I have written the technical documentation, this will be of a great help.
Thank you so much. I can definitely relate to the grammar. Next question we do have: how can an open source project ensure that contribution receive proper credit and recognition for their work while also fostering a collaborative environment that prioritizes the overall project success?
Yeah, there are different ways, I guess. Some projects, they have open collective sponsorship, so they can even distribute some of the sponsorship to contributors. I'll say usually these are the core contributors, because open source, there are a lot of big companies using it, but there is usually not that much money involved in building the projects. So when there is sponsorship, it's usually limited, and not that many people get to it. Something that helps as a recognition is if the open source project lists the contributors at the bottom of the README file. That's something that I have found valuable for my personal open source projects. I always try to list the contributors at the bottom. You even have a script to generate the contributors, and they find it valuable because if you apply for a job somewhere, it will be very visible that you have helped support a particular popular project. That's another way to recognize contributors. Just thanking them when they open an issue or a pull request and being nice to them, it's another way. Like we're all humans, like we can't be like our best selves all the time, but just when someone wants to help with improve your product, they have invested, it's good to be nice to them, right? So that's something that we really like invested in. It's one of our core values on the Angular team.
That's amazing. We do have a few more questions. What is the best way to showcase open source contribution in the resume in LinkedIn? How we can outshine herself in our work?
Yeah. Something that I've tried, I guess there are attachments in LinkedIn where you can link to projects that you have contributed to. Another thing, sometimes my projects are connected to the jobs that to my work. Like for example, in rhyme.com, when I was a CTO, we were using Go, the Go programming language, on our backend. And we were we had one Ruby on Rails developer who was very particular about coding style, and we would spend a lot of time just arguing on what is the right way to put, like, for certain coding practices that were preventing us from being productive. So I ended up implementing a linter that helps us enforce these practices when we agree on them directly as part of our CI pipeline. And I added it in this position specifically. And it's good also to highlight in the attachments or somewhere in your volunteering experience. I think that's another good place on LinkedIn, on volunteering experience, to share that you have volunteered being an open source contributor to a particular project, and you can mention the impact there as well. I'll say maybe recruiters would not notice that. Not all the recruiters, unfortunately, know what open source is and how it could be valuable. But during your interview with engineers from the team, they'll probably recognize the contribution.
Thank you. We do have a last questions, 2 questions. The next one is what strategy can open source project implement to ensure long-term engagement and prevent contributor from feeling like they have to be solely responsible for a project success?
Yeah, something, well, depends on the project to an extent. Like if on the Angular team, that's to an extent easy because we're hired by Google. So we have jobs, and that's our job to be making Angular better. If you are building an open source project by your own, like let's say my project Equalizer or my other project Revive, it's good to kind of to be able to empower some of the people contributing to your project and give them maintenance or maintainers access. So this way they would be able to make decisions together with you on what is good for the project. And over time, they will be able to become maintainers as well, and not all the weight will be on you. But that said, it's good to have alignment with them just to make sure that you want to move the project forward in the same direction. So I guess just kind of letting go in a way and bringing people together. Often when people start contributing, they get attached to the project and they get invested, and they show interest to become a maintainer.
Thank you. So next question is, where should a beginner start contributing with projects they are passionate about it, or contributing to projects that they have lower barrier entry to gain confidence first?
Yeah, you could try both, wherever works for you. Yeah, I'll say try both. Like if you're excited about Angular, I can tell you all, like from right now, there are plenty of opportunities to improve the documentation. These typos, we have even more of them right now because we have a brand new documentation website. In the JavaScript ecosystem, there are plenty of opportunities with the 10 stack, with like different React projects. React has a large community. Vue has plenty of opportunities. I'll say explore both. If you find opportunities in the project that you're currently using, I think this might be the most impactful because this directly connected to, like, you're using it on a day-to-day basis, so you're the most invested. And starting with documentation is usually a good starting point. One thing that I would just want to make sure that I share this here too. The only contribution that I guess I would advise against is deciding that a popular project needs a particular feature and spending many weeks working on it and opening a pull request, because without having a discussion with the maintainers, because I've seen that happen, and it's sad because if this pull request doesn't align with the vision for the product, we might have to close it, and someone has invested many days or many weeks of their time in order to open it, and it just would not be a good fit for the project. So if you want to make a large contribution, I would recommend you to first open an issue, discuss this with the maintainers, and if you decide that this is the right way to move forward, go ahead and implement it. And for beginning with contributions, again, documentation is a great starting place.
Thank you so much. In this tone, how do you decide if a project is worth contribution to? This is our last question to you.
Yeah, so a couple of things, I guess. A couple of things. One way is if you want to learn something, let's say my example with compilers. I wanted to learn compilers. So I would either build tools that are using the Angular compiler first to see how I can use the Angular compiler as a consumer. And over time, to understand the internals, I would pick an issue around the Angular compiler that I would like to resolve. If you're interested in how content management systems work, let's say, you can look at any documentation website there, and you can find opportunities. You can look at the issue tracker and find opportunities for improving the content management system or the documentation website, and you can make a small change. So that's one set of contributions that I appreciate the most because they help you grow in your career and as a professional. Another example would be if you're using a tool and on a day-to-day basis, you face the same issue and it just gets you, like, you get frustrated just seeing this bug all over again and again and again. You may want to, if this project is open source, you can just go there and fix the issue. That's power of open source, I guess. If you are frustrated by something, you can go there and fix it. We have a lot of people joining the Angular kind of inner circle of contributors this way. They're using the framework, they miss a feature that we have an opened feature request for, and they just go there and implement it as long as we have agreed that this is the right feature that belongs to the framework.
Thank you so much. We are honored to have you as a speaker here. I think last question is coming from Violina.
Yeah, I do have one final question. Imagine you are starting today and have no experience. The companies are hiring only experienced developers. So what would be your strategy in order to land your first job as a developer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess very much depends on my current state. If I have time to, like, whether I'm pressed by whether I have resources that where I have the, let's say, the privilege to not work for a couple of months. In this case, it makes sense to even work for free. That was my first job. Nobody really paid me. I joined the company and I was just helping them build something, and they taught me a lot. So I learned about normal forms in databases. Contribution to many people don't recommend that. So this works for me, but contribution to open source also helps. Starting something small or building your portfolio would demonstrate that you know certain technologies. Like having something on your GitHub account is usually a good indicator. Yeah, and brushing up your coding skills, spending some time on lead code. This is definitely always a good idea. Very much depends on the companies that you're applying to. Some companies, they don't really care too much about data structures and algorithms, but I would say that occasionally you have to solve a more complicated coding problem, and knowing how to traverse a tree, it has proven to be really helpful to me many times. I'll say it's not a strict requirement. You don't have to know data structures and algorithms to be a software engineer, but it ends up being helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for all the questions. Hopefully I was helpful with the questions.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Minko. It was an honor.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me online. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. And see you next time.